Hey guys, it's Jacob. I've been reading a lot of Stephen King lately, and at some point I want to do a video ranking all of Stephen King's novels, but for now I'm going to talk about Pet Sematary. I wrote an outline that was pretty intricate, and my wife is telling me not to talk about it, or not to look at the outline, because she said that I sounded scripted. The reason it sounds scripted though, and the reason that I think I wrote it so meticulously, as she has pointed out, is because I really like it, and so I want to be factual about it. Pet Sematary, you've probably heard of it. It's one of King's more well-known novels. I think the best one that I've read so far. It doesn't, it's not super exciting. There isn't like this enormous threat or anything right off the bat, or an intense foreshadowing. Like at the beginning of Carrie, Stephen King basically tells you what it's going to be about pretty early on, and you get an idea, and then it slowly comes to fruition. Pet Sematary is more like it's tension that builds in a subtle way, and then the foreshadowing gets more explicit as it goes on, but it kind of builds into this really big payoff. That's not to say that it's a boring book to read at all. It's very dramatic, and there's a lot of conflict in it, but the conflict has a lot to do with personal relationships. It all deals with the way that as human beings we deal with psychologically with the reality of death, and the fact that we either avoid the topic, or we don't want to think about it, or sometimes when we put it off too much and the reality of it hits home, we rebel against death itself. And part of what's so fascinating is the main character, Louis Creed. He is a realist, and so a lot of the conflict that happens has to do with, for example, his daughter. She's just coming to terms with the death and the fact that, oh, people are going to die someday. I'm going to die someday. My cat is going to die someday. Creed is trying to help her deal with that and kind of come at that in a way where he's not lying to her. He's not going this kind of Santa Claus route where he's not going to tell her, he's not going to avoid the topic of death. He's going to just give it to her straight. Not only is that difficult for him, but it creates conflict with his wife, who is just straight up deluded about death because her sister died when she was really young, and she was there for it, and it kind of messed her up. So it's kind of like stuff like this that is part of the ongoing conflict of the story. It's kind of brought on by the main character. Doctor lives in Chicago, moves to the countryside, just kind of dealing with those changes. He's kind of in the middle of a midlife crisis. Right near his property, there's this place called the Pet Sematary, and the reason it's there is because the house they moved into is right next to this high traffic road where pets get hit all the time, and so the locals put together this thing called the Pet Sematary. As a side note, there's a Native American burial ground that's right near where the Pet Sematary is, and that plays into it because there's a supernatural element to the story. But, at the beginning of the story, that's not really something that matters. Again, the foreshadowing is pretty subtle. Once I realized where it was going, and honestly, it's not that hard to find out. The story just doesn't give it to you in neon lights. It's I couldn't stop reading. It was just mesmerizing. But I also kind of wanted to stop reading because it was really disturbing. So that's the thing, is it's really dark. There's a lot of crazy, wild, supernatural stuff that is in the book. And I think that that's something that King does really well. But again, a lot of the best stuff about it is just kind of this microscopic look at the way that human beings deal with death. One of my favorite scenes in the whole thing is after Louis is talking with his daughter. His wife gets upset because, again, she has deluded herself to some degree, or she doesn't like dealing with difficult things, and she gets into an argument with him. And and she says, why would you tell our daughter that? Our cat is just fine. Look at him. Our cat is not going to die. And Louis gets upset, and he's like, our cat is going to die. So it's just this really, it's just really interesting and exciting to read. Just the dramatic conflict that conflicts that exist between the characters, even before the real plot of the story has started to kick in, and it's all just set up for what's going to happen. So yeah, it's difficult to get into extreme detail without giving too much away of the story. Hopefully you are getting the impression that I really like it and why I like it. Some of the things that I don't like, actually there's only one that really comes to mind. So this is an issue that exists it seems like it exists, generally speaking, in some of King's books. The only two examples that really come to mind right away are in The Stand and in The Shining, but it also exists in Pet Sematary. It's when characters do things that are uncharacteristic of them, that go against their motivations in a way that progresses the plot, but it doesn't really make sense, and it's justified by some kind of supernatural, vague supernatural interference. You know, it's not the worst in Pet Sematary, but there's two different instances of it where characters do things when they have the information, they know why they shouldn't do it. One instance of it is worse than the other instance, but it does take you out of the story a little bit. It creates this disconnect between the characters and who they are and what's going on. And sometimes the supernatural element is just a little vague, and it's kind of hard to imagine that it would cause characters to do these things, especially when you have the information and you know the characters have the information. They're not acting blind, like they're doing things that go against, that are completely the opposite of what they should be doing. That took me out of the story a little bit. Other than that, I liked it a lot. Yeah, it's a great read. I like it more than The Shining. There are some parallels a little bit to The Shining, which is a fantastic book, and it's Stephen King's third novel, and it's crazy that it's as good as it is. But because of the fact that The Shining is a little bit cliched in parts, and it has that heavy like supernatural interference with the character and what they're doing and what they believe in, that makes it kind of hard to believe it. It's worse than in Pet Sematary, and the ending of The Shining is kind of like over the top and cliched to me. Whereas Pet Sematary is really fascinating and dark in a way that not a lot of books I've read are. It's like very existential, very psychological. The subject matter is handled with such finesse, and you really feel like you're there, and you can imagine people going through the things that they're going through in this book. Topics we don't want to think about, situations we wouldn't want to be in, and they're handled in a way where you feel like you're there and you can sympathize with the characters. So yeah, this is my favorite book so far. And unless something changes, it's when I do eventually make a video ranking all of King's books, this one's going to be at the top, but we'll see. Yeah, if you're interested in reading Pet Sematary, highly recommend it. It is really dark and disturbing, but that's part of what I love about it. If you have read it, if you have any thoughts on it, leave in the comments below. Yeah, and I'll see you guys next time.